quite natural to be tempted. And there is nothing wrong per se in being tempted. In other words, it is not a sin to be tempted by certain things. And as you probably know, Mathew chapter 26:11, the verse we probably have memorized, Jesus said, "Keep watching and praying that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Jesus knows that we have right intentions, we want to do good things, and we want to live a righteous life, and our spirit is willing, but he understands that the flesh is weak. It is not a license to do anything, but it is a provision to see that it is quite natural to be tempted. So there is nothing wrong in being tempted per se. But when we go into the whole issue of temptation, and very often we interchange with another word. You know, I've heard many people saying that, "Man, I'm being tested by God, like no one else has been. Like, you know, I'm being tested by God. This is a time of testing, and God is testing me." And very often the word testing and temptation we use interchangeably. Have you ever come across that? You know, the word test and the word temptation. It kind of sounds, it's like the same ring to it, right? And I have used that sometime interchangeably to mean the same kind of thing. And I'm not going to do an exegetic study on what is test and what is temptation, but we will shed some light into it. So we are going to talk about that. But to give you a quick introduction, an event which is happening in your life, it can be anything, an event can be a test or a temptation depending on your response to it. Okay? I will explain it, don't worry about it. It is a matter of perspective. It is a matter of perspective. Any event that is happening in our life can be a test, can be a temptation, depending on how we respond to it. Okay? I will explain what that means. For example, test. When you say test, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? An exam, right? An exam, yeah. Who likes exam? Nobody, right? If you really like exam, you're weird. That's what you're. Nobody likes tests. Nobody likes exam. But we all do exams. We all take tests because we know that will take us to another level in where we are. So we know it is not necessarily desirable. It is not necessarily something we like, but we know that is important, right? So even though we don't necessarily like a test, we will go through a test because we know ultimately it is good, right? Like driver's test. You know, even though you drive and you can drive better than anybody on the street. If you drive in India, and I will say the Americans should never do a driver's test. They should give you a driver's test for free, a driver's license for free, and give you $150 just for applying it, right? Because if you drive in India, you can drive in any planet, right? So, but when we come here, we had to go through this daring. It was a nerve-wracking. I went and failed 3 times, even though I used to drive in. I have license from India. I have license from Canada. I have license from Kuwait. Still, the Americans failed me 3 times. So I feel when you say test, right? It's not something I ever want to go through, or I don't want to go through. So, but we know that gives us permission to get into our car and drive away, and it takes us into another level of our life in America or wherever we are. And as opposed to temptation, when we say temptation is never good, right? Temptation is never good, but desirable. We like temptation, even though we don't want to say it, right? That's why it is a temptation, right? You won't be tempted by something you don't like, right? Right? If you're going to say, "Oh, I'm making broccoli soup for today, and I'm not going to be tempted by it unless I'm really, really hungry." But if you say there is French fry, I'll be tempted. But French fries are not good for you. Broccoli soup is good for you. But still, a temptation is something which is not good for you, but you still like it. You want that, right? So that's the difference. As a driver, you have a driver's test, which is good but not desirable, but there are a lot of driver's temptation too, right? Once you get your license, you get in the car, you're tempted to drive fast, right? Or you're tempted to honk somebody. And you're tempted, not necessarily you, but other people, do curse you, or, they give you a thumbs up with the wrong hand, and you're tempted to go back and retaliate. There are a lot of temptations, but all these temptations eventually end up in accidents, right? So temptation always, end up in accident. It's good, it's desirable, but it's not good. So this is a big difference between test and temptation. Now, but when we say, oh, I'm being tested by God, or all this kind of things, when we say, the first thing we have to get it out of our mind is that very often we consider God as the author of temptation or test per se. I'll come to that in a bit. So I want you to read one particular verse, James chapter 1, verse 13. James chapter 1, verse 13. This is what it says. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. Okay? So you have to get God out of the equation right in the beginning, right from the beginning. That verse is crystal clear. God is not part of the tempted. God is not somebody who causes or creates temptation scenario for you, okay? Now then, who is then, right? So who is then? So I'm going to bring your attention to three major temptation scenes in the Bible, okay? And the first one, you all know, what is the first temptation scene? Where do you see that? Garden of Eden, right? Garden of Eden. And who is there? Eve, and then Adam comes a little later, but then the other guy, devil, Satan, right? God is not present there, right? God is not present. Actually, Satan came. Satan was kind of waiting for that particular time. God disappeared from the scene so that Satan could come and convince Eve and then Adam, right? So, in that first scene, God is not present, and God is definitely not the author or the creator of the temptation. But in the second scene, another temptation sequence is in the book of Job. Book of Job, right? And in the book of Job, you probably know the story, right? And God is sitting up on the throne, and then he's having this conference meeting, staff meeting kind of stuff, once in a week or so. And then comes everybody, all the angels come and report stuff. And then comes Satan. He wanders around the world, and he comes and he gives his report to. And then God asks, did you see my Job, my devotee, and what do you think about him? And then basically Satan comes up with a scenario saying that he is all good, he is all righteous just because he is being protected. Let me touch him, then he is going to forget all his faith, and he is going to go back to who he was, right? And that's how the temptation starts as far as Job is concerned, right? But the funny thing is, God doesn't do anything to Job, does he? No, God doesn't destroy his property. God doesn't kill his sons and daughters. God doesn't, bring him suffering or wound or boil or whatever he had. But God does something. What does he do? He allows it. He allows it. Are you following me? Are you following me? God tells Satan, yes, you can touch Job's property. Yes, you can touch his body. So God gives permission for Satan to do whatever he is doing, because he is the author of all these evil things that is happening. Yet, by allowing that, isn't God kind of guilty? Right? Isn't by allowing isn't somebody who allows or let something bad happen, is sort of almost equally guilty of that wrongdoing. You know what I mean? Like, I'm thinking like a cynic here, right? And so, Satan cannot act without God's permission. That's so even though Satan is the creator of the evil things, or all the suffering, all the sickness, Satan cannot act without God's permission. So by giving him permission, in a way, God is also, we wonder about that, right? So, there is this verse in Luke chapter 22:31, you probably know. Jesus said to Simon, "Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has demanded permission to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail." So, Satan is asking permission to torture all of us. Man, if he wanted Peter, do you think he will let us go? So he is asking permission because God has to say yes. Otherwise, he cannot do anything. So he is asking permission, but God says no. Okay? So to understand the scenario, this is something I would call, this is basically what I wanted to give you. There's something called, I will call a principle of hedges. Hedges, Hedges, or fences, right? Like, white picket fences we have. Or hedges, dividing the property. And it is actually, I'm going to read a verse here. Job chapter 1, verses 10 to 12. Job chapter 1, verses 10 to 12. So this is what Satan, the first scenario I described, this is what Satan comes to God and says this to God. "Have you not made a hedge about him and his house," about Job, "and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands. His possessions have increased in the land. But put forth your hand now and touch all that he has. He will surely curse you to your face." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not put forth your hand on him." So Satan departed from the presence of the Lord. So Satan comes and Satan talks about hedges. I like that. Sometimes even Satan can teach you some good lessons. So it gives you a picture. And Satan saw something when he went to Job's house. There was this hedge around his property, everything he had. And then there is another hedge around his body. Then there is another hedge inside his body, his soul, his life. Okay? So Satan is going to God and says, Can you take out that first hedge so that I can move in to his backyard? And can I test that he is really good or is really worthy of that? So God thinks for a minute and he says, okay, I'm going to let that hedge off so that you can move in and see how he's going to react to the loss of everything he has. And suddenly, one fine day, Job is getting 4 news from 4 different servants come, and one person comes and says that there was this Sabaeans comes and destroy the oxen and donkeys, and then another guy comes and say Chaldeans come and destroys some other part of their property. Then another person comes and says there is this fire of God coming and destroys everything they had in that place. And then another person comes and says the wind comes and destroys everything he had, including his children and everybody. Everything is lost. So the first hedge is gone, and then comes all this disaster. And the Job sits down and says, naked I came, naked I'll go. Everything, whatever the Lord gave and the Lord has taken away, blessed be the name of the Lord. Now, the thing about this is this hedges created by God is an act of mercy, right? Hedge is not something Job created. Hedge is not something it is not a right or it's not a privilege, because we live in a fallen world. We live in a fallen world, but God, out of his mercy, creates these hedges, which he has every right to take it away. I'll just give you an example. Let me give you an example. It might be, better for us to understand. Say a man sees a homeless boy, walking around, and he sees a homeless boy and talks to him and hears the tragic story. His dad and mom left, and he's an orphan. He's in the street. And then the man takes him home and gives him clothes, feeds him, and everything he needs, sends him to school, and he grows up, and this man becomes his adopted dad, right? And after a while, and then he sends this now he's not a little kid anymore, he's his son, he sends his son to college, university in a big city. And the son goes to university, and then he's away from dad physically, so he hangs out with the wrong crowd, and he becomes friend with a druggie or something, a drug addict or something like that. And they get into some bad company. He makes a mess of his life, and then one day he ends up in jail. Okay, son ends up in jail, and he gives a call to his dad. Dad, I'm in jail. Come and rescue me, bail me out, right? And the father gets this call, and he's thinking, man, this guy was an orphan, right? And he didn't have any chance in his life. I took him up, and I gave everything I had. I gave him my name. I gave him my money. I gave everything he wanted. I did all these things for him, and I protected him. And finally, this is what he does. He had this wrong friend, and between his friend and he messed up his life. Now he's calling me. I'm going to bail him out, but I'm going to do this. I'm going to let him sit in the prison for a night, so that let him learn a lesson. Let him learn a lesson, right? And the next day he goes, bail him out. And the son says, what a cruel father you are. How dare you do that? How dare you let me sit in the jail? How could you do that? Now, who are you with? Are you with the son or are you with the father? Right? Are you with the son? No, right? No. Because the son, to start with, the son didn't deserve it at all. Now, this is what I just told you is the story of the entire Bible. If you want me to make an analogy of the entire Bible and tell it to you in 2 minutes, that's the story I will tell you. The story of the Bible is God creates human beings in his image and in his likeness. It is not out of our, not something we earned. It was a provision of his grace, and he gives us the key to the world, and he gives us the dominion of this earth, and we invite a druggy friend into the company. That's what was happening in the first temptation scene. We invited this friend we call Satan. Come on in, move into my apartment. And we gave the dominion of this world to Satan. That's why the Bible calls Satan the prince of this world. And he is the ruler of the world, not God. Not God with the capital G, small g. Satan, right now, the world is under the dominion of Satan. Why? Because we gave it to him. We are the prodigal sons of this story, right? So, sometimes the evil things happen to us. God will just wait for a day or two so that he wanted us to learn something from what this trial or temptation we are going through, something which we brought on ourselves. The hedge around us is an act of mercy God has given to protect us. It is not something we earned. Does that make any sense? Peter didn't deserve that hedge around him. Job didn't deserve that hedge around him. I don't deserve that hedge around us. As an act of fall that happened in Genesis chapter 3, none of us deserve anything from God. We are sent out from Eden, but God, out of his mercy, created this hedge, and it is his right to take it away. Just by taking that hedge away, he is not being guilty of any crime. Does that make sense? So just by allowing something to happen, God is not part of the equation. God is not to blame. He is removing that hedge, that first hedge in the case of Job, because he knew that he could trust Job. See, sometimes God is allowing the hedges to be removed from our life or from our property. It is an act of confidence in us. It is not an intention to trust. It is an expression of confidence. If Satan went to God and says, I want to remove that hedge from Matthew's house, Matthew's life, God will say, no way. No way. I'm not going to let that hedge away from Matthew's life, because the moment it goes, this big preacher you see, he may not stand a chance. So I'm not going to let that hedge go. I'm thinking about building another hedge around him. Because we are weak in so many ways, right? But by the fact that God did not allow that hedge around from Peter to go, but allowed that in the case of Job, is an act of trusting Job. It is an expression of his confidence. So whatever temptation that comes to us, it can be a test from God's perspective. It can be a temptation from the devil's perspective. Right? Whatever the devil is trying to tempt, depending on our response, can be good or bad. It can be an opportunity for us to learn, like the father in the story used it as a teaching moment for his son. I'm going to use this. I did not create jail. The father is nowhere responsible for that jail incident, right? Even though I didn't put my son in the jail, all these evil things that happened to him, and I am going to use as an opportunity for him to learn. And there is another verse which says, 1 Corinthians 10:13, God will not tempt us beyond what we are able. So when God removes a hedge from you, He knows that can be removed. He knows He can trust you with that. So he has this, in his ultimate wisdom, he is using it as a teaching moment. He is not partnering with Satan. He is rather using Satan. He is rather using what Satan does to create something beautiful thing out of an apparently evil thing. That's what God always does. God can create something beautiful out of chaos. God creates order out of chaos, beauty out of ugliness. And when Satan does something to hurt, when Satan brings temptation, God turns it around and makes it a test so that we can graduate to the next level. And he can show it. He can show it to the devil and everybody else in the court. Look at Matthew, John, or look at Job, or look at Peter, and look, now he is ready. Now he is ready to go to the next level. So the point I'm trying to make is that the devil is the only one responsible for temptation. But having said that, we are even more responsible than devil itself. So I'm going to read one last verse, which basically says, devil is called the tempter. I can give you references and all that. I'm not going to do that. And the devil is also called the one who deceives the whole world. So it's his job to do temptation. It's his job to arrange all this, orchestrate all these calamities, whatever we see in the world. But James chapter 1:14, this is very important. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. So we cannot even blame Satan for temptation. We cannot blame God, definitely, not even Satan. It is a matter of how are we going to respond to it. Each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Now the verse which we read today is that the Spirit led Jesus into the wilderness to be tempted. See, we are in so many ways in a wilderness in our own life, right? A wilderness is a place where we are lonely, where we think nobody is seeing us. And that's where Job was, right? Job was alone. Job couldn't see anything. And Job thought everybody deserted him. Even in Jesus' own life, he said, God, my God, why have you forsaken me? And that's the experience of wilderness. In our life, sometimes we wonder, does God really see this? What I'm going through? The pain I am suffering, the pain I'm bearing, the hurt I'm carrying in my life. Is God seeing this? And when you think that, always remember, that is exactly what wilderness is. That is how wilderness feel like. But the good news is that whenever we are in the wilderness, the verse which says, the Spirit led him to wilderness. See, you are in the wilderness because you are led to the wilderness. That's the most beautiful thing about that verse. You know, if we walked into the wilderness, then you better be careful. But sometimes we are in the wilderness because the Spirit led us there. Because the Spirit wanted us to be with, because there is one person went to the wilderness before us. That's what we read today. Jesus was in the wilderness before we were. And whatever is going to happen in the wilderness is going to define your life for the rest of your whatever God is going to give you, because, and that's what happened to Jesus. What happened in that wilderness, in a way, was the beginning of his ministry. He came out of it as a new being, in a way. Right? It's like wilderness is like a cocoon. Like the larva, the ugly larva goes into the cocoon. Then what comes out of it is a beautiful butterfly. But it is not fun to be inside a cocoon. Not to be heard, no friends, nobody. It's deserted by everybody, feeling like even deserted by God. But that is always how the birthing process starts. We were all born. Do you remember that 9 months you were in your mother's womb? I don't remember, but I can picture it was very dark. It was very lonely. All I could hear was probably the beats, like the heartbeats of my mother. I don't know, there was a world out there. I don't know anything out there, but I am in this darkness. I am in this loneliness, hearing only this sound and faint sound and wondering if there is a meaning, if there is a purpose, if there is an end to it. And one day I come out and then the life begins. So every birthing process happens in loneliness, in the experience of wilderness, in the experience of struggle. So what we are going to do in the wilderness is going to decide whether we are going to go through a test or it is a temptation. We have every right to mess it up, but we also have the courage. God has given us the courage or strength to turn it around and take it a test so that we will come out of it with flying colors. That's what Job did. He graduated from 3 tests. That was the first hedge. Then Satan went and said, God, can I remove one more hedge? Then God said, okay, you can remove the next hedge, but don't touch his life. Then again, Satan attacked his body. But out of all this, Job came out with flying colors, and he got everything double-fold. And the same thing with Jesus too. Satan tested him. He graduated with flying colors. And I hope and pray that we will do just the same in the experience of wilderness. And we will turn it around. Whatever suffering we are going through, whatever difficulty we are going through, we will use it as a birthing process so that God will make something new through our life.